Hello, everyone. My name is James Enoch, and I'm the head athletic trainer here at Central High School in Harris County, Texas. And today we're going to be discussing my plan for mitigating the spread of the COVID-19 virus and our return to play and testing protocols that we will be utilizing here as we transition back to a more typical athletic season and in-person classes. So first, a few FAQs answered about COVID-19. What is COVID-19? It is the disease caused by the virus SARS-CoV-2 that first appeared in 2019 and caused the shutdown of the majority of in-person classes in 2020. It is transmitted primarily by respiratory droplets spread through the air from person to person. In many cases, it will take around 2 weeks for an exposed infected person to show any symptoms of COVID-19, so it takes quite a bit of time before a person may know that they're infected. Many cases in general are only mildly symptomatic, but in the long term, there have been many recorded instances of lung damage, heart inflammation, lasting shortness of breath when exercising, etc., in even mild cases. And why this is so important is it is a highly transmissible virus from person to person, especially as more variants are starting to appear in the hospital systems. So we know that it's becoming more transmissible over time. But one key component of the mitigation strategy is vaccination. We know the vaccines are safe and effective, and vaccinated individuals show significant resistance to symptomatic disease as well as lowered rates of transmission to other individuals after um, the second shot or after they're showing antibodies for the virus. And I'd like to also note that while we are not going to specifically require all student athletes to be vaccinated, all athletes in our school are eligible and they can receive the vaccine at their own will whenever they decide to for free. And we will be providing resources so that they understand the process and are able to receive the vaccine if they so choose. And we will highly encourage that for all of our students. Next, some statistics about the latest data from the CDC about transmission rates. So as you can see, the nationwide trends, we are entering into a sort of third wave here. So we have to be especially vigilant about some of the strategies that I outline later in the presentation about mitigating person-to-person contact and ensuring masking of unvaccinated individuals. And on the right here, we see some general demographic data about cases reported, as well as reported deaths of COVID-19 by age group. So obviously from the data, the cohort that we're discussing in high school level athletes are not the majority of cases, and certainly the vast minority of deaths from this disease. But the primary concern is the lasting effects, especially in highly active individuals, about lung function, heart function, kidney function, etc. And we just want to ensure that the highest precautions are taken so that we can avoid these long-term impacts. So as far as the goals of our organization and why we feel the need to return to some more typical pattern of teaching and athletic participation, we know from data coming out, especially in the younger students, but in high school age students as well, the quality of education of purely online is diminished. And so returning to in-person classes is critical for keeping testing scores up and maintaining passing rates for all of our students. The lack of in-person classes for the majority of the 2020 calendar year, and also the cancellation of many athletic team events, individual workouts, and everything like that means that these schools calculations for attendance as well as national funding um, were diminished. So it's important as from the standpoint of the school board to maintain and regain those numbers, as well as for our faculty and staff, teachers, etc., about maintaining their expectations for how they can best educate their students, and for the rest of our faculty about maintaining their jobs in some regular fashion that they can expect to come back to work in a normal capacity. And it is also important to maintain accountability and transparency in this transitional process as guidelines may change, transmission rates may shift in our community. So it's important to not only take into consideration our needs as a school and as educators, but also as our resource to our community as a source of information. The athletic events are also important for our school because they serve as a source of achievement and potential recognition by university programs and scholarships for our student athletes, as well as being a important venue for fundraising, outreach, etc., for um, other organizations and student-led events within the school. Um, as I previously stated, some sense of return to normalcy is important, but it has to be balanced with the best practices guidelines that we know are effective for maintaining public health and reducing transmission of COVID. So now let's get into some of the more specific guidelines for return to participation. Um, Pre-participation exams are a critical part of maintaining athlete health and wellness in any athletic season, but because of the closure of many doctor's offices and places that students would typically receive their um, physical in the preseason or before preseason training begins. Um, it's been suggested uh, that we offer extensions for a prior physical if they expire in the fall of 2020, in the spring, excuse me, of 2021, that they extend the validity of those exams for 1 year so that they will not have to necessarily go back to their physician if they don't feel comfortable. But we will still conduct a full pre-participation exam as part of our onboarding of the athletes. And as part of that, it's going to be important that we inquire about COVID-19 testing history in each student. And if they do have a history of positive test, and especially if they have had symptomatic COVID-19, follow-up tests, as well as a COVID-19 specific screening of the lung function, heart rhythm, kidney function, and pretty much all systems that may be affected by the virus be performed. We will also require that athletes complete routine screenings for common COVID symptoms. This is something as simple as the temperature checks that you see in many hospital settings, as well as a quick questionnaire about symptoms like shortness of breath, um, feeling tired or dizzy, and these can be answered in a like to their coaches or to the athletic training staff, etc. And we will also offer additional testing resources such as PCR and rapid COVID tests for our higher risk students that we know, due to their previous PPEs, have some predisposing condition that makes them more at risk to the virus, such as a heart arrhythmia or asthma or other common conditions that would predispose them to symptomatic COVID-19. Now let's talk about some of the facilities requirements. For all of our training facilities, such as the weight rooms, practice courts, the athletic training facility, and any indoor training area, we will require that we regularly sanitize the all surfaces, such as the floor, training equipment, with germicidal disinfectant. We will constantly promote hand washing before, during, and after the workout sessions for our athletes. We will also provide individual towels and water bottles so that athletes are not sharing and potentially transmitting saliva or sweat through those routes. We will distribute masks and have masks available, and we will encourage mask wearing, especially for all non-vaccinated athletes, but um, they will not necessarily be a requirement of all practice spaces, but according to CDC guidelines, in areas of where high transmission is possible, such as smaller spaces like the ATF, or if the weight room is not able to be fully ventilated, we will require that athletes wear masks. We'll also have to schedule a 10-minute window for cleaning and sanitizing between training groups. And in general, for all indoor spaces, we'll try to maximize airflow. So doors open to the outside, windows allowing for maximum flow, etc. And trying to schedule groups for outdoor training whenever possible will also be important for social distancing efforts and minimizing person-to-person contact as much as we can. So there are also some specific considerations as it pertains to return to physical activity. Many of our athletes, after a year of non-participation, will be relatively deconditioned because they weren't able to participate with their sport and weren't able to train in a gym or recreational facility as they're used to. And a year of isolation will lead to significant loss of physical fitness. So in general, all coaches will have to submit their training plans to me, the head athletic trainer, and we will be following the 50-30-20-10 rule, which means that in the first week, the maximum allowed volume and exertion will be 50% of the maximum recorded by the athlete, and then 30% for the second week, 20% for the third, and 10% for the fourth. That means a 50, 30, 20, and 10% reduction from their maximum recorded limit that they previously were conditioned to prior to the pandemic. Some heat acclimatization guidelines. So there is a 5 to 7 day period of adjustment to outdoor conditions involving extreme heat. So after a delay like this, where they may have been used to just staying indoors all day long, this is extremely important to consider. And for this period, we have to limit the intensity and duration according to heat acclimatization guidelines, which can be found in the student athlete handbook. And any athlete with a prior positive COVID test must be monitored, and we'll have to restart the protocol of 50-30-20-10, as well as the heat acclimatization period after any additional need for self-isolation, such as after a COVID-19 exposure or positive test. So continuing along those lines, if an athlete is knowingly exposed firsthand to a person with symptomatic COVID-19, or if the athlete themselves tests positive for COVID, they must immediately inform myself and any of the coaching staff and cease participation and self-isolate at home for a minimum of 10 days or until they have a negative test. And in either case, they have to be asymptomatic or having no symptoms before they return to participation. And according to best practices, if more than 3 individuals on a single team or in a single workout group that were knowingly in close contact test positive, and the entire team that they may have had additional contacts with must be tested so that we can ensure that we pick up all the positive tests from that single spike in positive tests. And the previously outlined return to activity guidelines will be followed. For competitive events and hosting spectators and visiting teams. So let's talk about masking guidelines. We cannot specifically mandate that all spectators be masked, but we will strongly encourage masking for spectators, particularly for the non-vaccinated, so that we can limit person-to-person transmission. Currently, our state and local guidelines for facility occupancy limits are at 100%, so they have been restored to full capacity, particularly for outdoor stadium settings like with football and track and field. But it is advised that if any changes do occur because of a rise in transmission rates, we will follow the state or local guidelines. So particularly for our indoor facilities like volleyball and basketball, we'll have to make sure that we stay up to date with those recommendations. And additionally, for all of our facilities, we'll provide hand sanitation stations around the main concourse areas where the highest traffic and highest touch areas are occurring, and also nearby all of the restroom facilities. And for opposing teams and visiting teams, we will communicate with our peers and their athletic trainers in order to monitor how many of their athletes or whether they have any athletes currently self-isolating due to COVID-19. And we will be sure and check all of their athletes for with the same pre-participation checklist that our athletes submit to daily for symptoms and possible exposure, temperature checks, etc., prior to competing and coming into close contact with our own athletes. So that concludes our general guidelines for return to activity after COVID-19 for the school year 2021-22. Thank you very much.